She waits for the message, the glance, the invitation. Not because she doesn't have a life, but because some part of her has been trained to believe that being wanted is the reward, that being chosen means she matters. So she edits herself. She softens her truth, tilts her voice, makes herself a little smaller, a little easier to like. It's not desperation, not obviously. It's subtle. It's strategic. It's the learned reflex of a woman who's been taught, again and again, that caring is currency and silence is survival. Approval becomes a spell cast early, reinforced often. Be good, be pretty, be patient. Don't ask for too much. Don't feel too much. Don't want too much. And so she doesn't. Instead, she performs. She becomes what she thinks he'll want. And for a moment, it works. He comes closer. He texts back. He says she's different. And for that brief flicker, she feels safe. Seen. Almost enough. But the cost is steep. Because in chasing connection, she loses her own. She becomes so focused on being loved that she forgets to be real. She becomes so consumed with how he feels about her that she stops asking how she feels about him. Her energy, her attention, her sense of self all start orbiting around someone who hasn't earned that gravity. And deep down, she knows it. She knows this isn't love, it's a performance. A transaction masquerading as intimacy. Louise von Franz would have called this the trap of the undeveloped feminine. The woman who has not yet called her power back from the outer world, who still believes that her value must be mirrored in a man's desire to be made real. Von Franz saw it as a kind of spiritual amnesia, the forgetting of one's own center, one's own authority, in pursuit of a fantasy written by someone else. This is not weakness. This is programming, cultural, psychological, generational, but once seen clearly, it begins to lose its grip. Because what feels like love, this anxious, overgiving, shape-shifting state, is not love. It is fear dressed as devotion. It is self-erasure in the name of connection. It is the echo of a girl who learned that love must be earned, not received. And the woman who starts to see this, who begins to question the spell, is already waking up. She is beginning to ask different questions, not, how do I keep him, but what part of me believes I need to. That question changes everything. Because the moment she stops trying to be chosen is the moment she chooses herself, and in that choice, everything begins to shift. She never needed a spotlight to be powerful. Louise von Franz didn't speak for attention, she spoke for truth. When she met Carl Jung at 18, it wasn't chance, it was initiation. He saw in her what few men of his time would recognize in a woman: intellectual fire, a mystical clarity, and a gift for seeing beneath the surface of the soul. She became his closest collaborator, not his echo, but his mirror. Where Jung carved the map of the psyche, von Franz walked it, barefoot and fearless. She wasn't interested in theories that stayed on paper. She wanted transformation. Real, raw, inner upheaval, the kind that rewrites a life from the inside out. Her work focused on the unconscious, not as some abstract dream work, but as a living intelligence with its own rhythm, its own hunger, its own purpose. She understood symbols like most people understand language, and she believed that the unconscious speaks most loudly through relationships, especially romantic relationship. Von Franz had a particular fascination with the feminine journey, with what it meant to become a woman in wholeness, not in performance. She saw how so many women, brilliant, intuitive, capable, were pulled out of themselves in love. How they gave their power away, not because they were weak, but because they were looking for something that had never been mirrored to them. Inner authority, not outer validation. She saw how women confused projection with presence, anxiety with affection, sacrifice with intimacy. But she also knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much deeper one, a mythic one. Because in every woman who suffers in love, there is a woman who is being called to awaken, to reclaim the pieces she handed over, to withdraw the fantasies she placed on another, to stop waiting to be chosen and begin choosing herself. Von Franz did not give advice. She gave mirrors, and her mirror didn't flatter, it revealed. It showed the woman not what she wanted to see, but what she needed to see. The places she betrayed herself, the roles she played, the unconscious contracts she signed in silence. But she didn't leave her there. She showed her the way back, through symbol, through shadow, through soul. This is where our story turns, because to understand why everything changes when you stop caring, you need more than strategy. You need soul clarity. And von Franz offers that not with noise, but with depth. She doesn't tell you how to get him to chase you. She tells you how to stop chasing what was never yours to begin with. And in that stopping, something remarkable begins. Not the end of love. The beginning of a different kind. You meet him, and something clicks. Not just attraction, but recognition. As if you've known him before, in a dream, in a poem, in some half-remembered story from childhood. His voice lands just right. His presence stirs something ancient. You call it chemistry, destiny, even, but Louise von Franz would call it something else. Projection. In Jungian psychology, every woman carries an inner masculine figure, the animus. He is not a man, he is a presence. He holds her clarity, her independence, her boldness, her spiritual fire. But if she hasn't yet made a conscious relationship with him, she doesn't recognize him inside. She searches for him outside. And when she finds a man who carries even a fragment of his image, she lights up, not because he is right, but because he feels familiar. He fits the shape of something she didn't know she'd lost. This is how projection works. It's not a lie. It's a truth misplaced. You see in the other what you haven't yet claimed in yourself. And because you haven't owned it, you assume they must hold it for you. His certainty mirrors your self-doubt. His presence fills your emptiness. His ambition feels like a map for your own unlived desires. He becomes, in your eyes, not just a man but a symbol. The embodiment of what you need to become. And so the chase begins. But you're not really chasing him. You're chasing what he represents. You're chasing your own unlived self. And no matter how hard you try to get closer, it never satisfies. Because the part of you that longs for him isn't hungry for his love, it's hungry for your love. For the return of what you gave away the moment you believed someone else could complete you. Von Franz warned that romantic infatuation is often a form of psychic possession. You lose your ground. You mistake myth for man. And the danger is not heartbreak, it's forgetting yourself. When you project your animus onto a partner, you don't see him. You see your idea of him. And when the illusion breaks, as it always does, you're left disoriented, angry, ashamed. Not because he changed, but because you were never really relating to him. You were relating to your own longing, dressed in his face. But this isn't failure. It's initiation. The moment you realized the love story was never about him, it was about you, about the return of your own inner fire. The animus isn't something to find. He's something to meet, to integrate, to trust. And when you do, the projection dissolves. You no longer chase. You no longer wait to be seen. You walk in with your own light. And any man who enters that light must come as he is, not as your fantasy, but as himself. That's where real love begins. It feels noble, almost sacred, the way you care. You remember his schedule, notice the tone of his texts, decode the silence between the words. You hold space, forgive quickly, offer softness even when you're depleted. You tell yourself it's love, that you're patient, understanding, evolved. But beneath that devotion is something harder to admit. Fear, the fear that if you stop giving so much, he might stop showing up. Louise von Franz would have seen it clearly. Caring too much isn't always love. Sometimes it's strategy. A covert attempt to secure connection, to avoid abandonment. To control the emotional weather of the relationship by constantly managing your role in it. The unconscious doesn't care about how good your intentions sound, it only sees the pattern. And the pattern is clear. Overcaring becomes a way of staying in power. It's not domination in the traditional sense. It's subtle. You don't demand, you overgive. You don't threaten, you sacrifice. You don't control with force, you control through availability, through understanding, through anticipating needs before they're spoken. And underneath it all is the hope that if you care enough, you won't be left, that if you keep loving harder, he'll finally love you back the way you want to be loved. But this is where it breaks. Because overcaring creates imbalance. It smothers, it crowds, it traps. It turns relationship into obligation, into quiet manipulation. He may feel it even if he can name it, that being handled instead of met, managed instead of seen. And instead of drawing him closer, it makes him retreat. Not because he's cold, but because something in the dynamic no longer feels clean. Von Franz spoke of the feminine power that becomes distorted when it is unconscious. When a woman gives from emptiness, when she offers more than she truly means, when she says yes to avoid discomfort, she fragments, she splits off from herself. And in doing so, she loses the very presence that would invite true intimacy. The man feels the effort but not the essence. He receives the care but not the clarity. The painful irony is this: The more you care from fear, the less real connection you create. The more you chase security through pleasing, the more insecure everything becomes. Because no one can love you fully when you only half there, when the real you is buried under strategy, self-abandonment, and silent hopes. So what happens when you stop overcaring? When you stop overfunctioning in the relationship? Stop carrying more than your share. Stop pretending you don't have needs of your own. At first, it feels like a risk, a free fall. But it's also the beginning of truth. Because real love doesn't require constant maintenance. It doesn't need to be earned through exhaustion. It needs presence. It needs boundaries. It needs you, the whole you. Not the version who overcares, but the one who finally comes home to herself. She doesn't mean to lose herself. It happens slowly. A few unanswered messages, a sudden shift in tone, a vague withdrawal she can't explain. She begins to question herself, her words, her timing, her energy. Was she too much? Not enough? She replays every moment in her mind, like a film she's desperate to rewrite. And underneath the spiral is a familiar ache, the fear of not being chosen. This is the anxious feminine, not because she's weak, but because she's unrooted. Her focus has moved outward, toward the man, toward the connection, toward whatever scrap of certainty she can find in his behavior. She becomes hyper-tuned to his moods and blind to her own. She begins to orbit around him not because he's earned it, but because she's forgotten the gravity of her own center. Louise von Franz would not have judged this. She would have understood it as the symptom of something deeper, the absence of the animus. In Jungian psychology, the animus is the inner masculine logic, direction, discernment, boundary, integrity. He is not a fantasy of a man. He is the structure within a woman that allows her to stand, to speak, to see clearly. And when that structure is undeveloped or exiled, she becomes porous. She cannot hold herself, so she looks for someone else to do it for her. But no man, no matter how strong or sincere, can replace an unclaimed inner foundation. When the animus is missing, love becomes survival. Affection becomes currency. She gives too much, asks for too little, and calls it loyalty. She mistakes nervous anticipation for chemistry, and inconsistency for mystery. She believes she's falling in love, but she is really falling into projection, hoping someone else will build what she has not yet built inside. Von Franz saw that without the animus, a woman lives in emotional overgrowth. She feels everything, but cannot shape it. She wants closeness, but fears the cost of boundaries. She longs for depth, but cannot stop over-explaining her worth. She loves not from wholeness, but from hunger. And hunger distorts everything. The return of the animus is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It begins with a pause, with a breath before a reply, with the quiet question, what do I need right now? It is the moment she stops chasing clarity from someone else and starts offering it to herself. She doesn't stop feeling, she stops leaking. And in that shift, she becomes something entirely different, not a seeker of approval, but the keeper of her own truth. And men feel it. They feel when a woman is no longer asking to be saved. They feel when her love is a gift, not a strategy. When her desire is rooted, not frantic. When she can hold herself, he is invited not to rescue her, but to meet her. And that's the difference between losing yourself in Lavande, finding something sacred within it. She no longer rushes to respond. She no longer fills the silence with explanations, emoji-laced reassurances, or soft-spoken compromises. She's not cold, not distant, not playing a game. She's just still. And in that stillness, something ancient begins to rise. Not weakness, not waiting, power. It's not the kind of power the world taught her to chase. Not loud, not performative, not earned through striving, or validated through applause. This power doesn't ask to be seen, it reveals itself through presence. And when it arrives, she feels it like a return, as if the parts of her she once scattered trying to prove, to please, to perform have come home. Louise von Franz understood this kind of feminine strength. She saw that the modern woman had been pushed into perpetual motion, told she must do, in order to be valuable. That her worth lived in her availability, her productivity, her ability to always say yes. But von Franz pointed to something older, a kind of rootedness the world forgot. The feminine, she said, is not about motion, it's about magnetism. Not about seeking, but about allowing. When a woman drops into her stillness, she stops chasing. She stops explaining. She stops moving toward what was never moving toward her. Not because she's giving up, but because she's finally aligning. Her worth no longer hinges on how much she gives or how well she performs. It lives in her being, and that shift, subtle, invisible, undeniable, is what turns the energy of a room. She's not proving her value, she's remembering it. In the past, she filled every gap with effort. If he pulled away, she leaned in. If he was unclear, she became more available. She believed her devotion would build the bridge. But now, she lets the space be. She holds the tension. She doesn't reach across the silence, she watches what the silence reveals. Because real power isn't in controlling the outcome, it's in staying seated in your truth, no matter what the outcome is. Von Franz knew that this stillness wasn't passivity, was initiation. A woman who can be still in uncertainty is a woman who no longer fears herself. She can hear her own instincts again. She can feel when something isn't aligned without needing to fix it. She lets things fall away without collapsing. And in that calm, she becomes unmistakable. Not for how much she gives, but for how clearly she sees. Stillness is not the absence of energy. It's concentrated energy. It's the refusal to leak life force into things that drain. It's the quiet knowing that nothing real requires you to leave yourself. And when she embodies that knowing, everything changes. She doesn't beg, she doesn't chase, she doesn't perform, she just is. And from that place, the world begins to meet her differently, not because she pushed harder, but because she finally stopped. He doesn't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was in the pause before you answered. Maybe it was the way you looked at him, not with longing, not with anger, but with a quiet recognition that said, I see you, but I no longer need you to see me. That's when he felt it. The shift, like something subtle but seismic, had moved beneath the surface. The warmth was still there, but the pull was gone. The chase was over, but not in the way he expected. Because this time, you stopped running. Louise von Franz spoke of the energetic dynamics that live beneath our words. You don't have to say, I care too much. Your nervous system says it for you. You're overchecking, you're overgiving, you're silent, hoping all of it broadcasts the same unconscious message. I'm holding this for both of us. And most men feel it, even if they can't name it. Some lean into it, some take advantage. Some quietly drift, not knowing why the air suddenly feels too heavy. But when you stop caring in the old way, when you stop managing, stop bending, stop waiting for breadcrumbs masked as connection, he feels that too. It's not bitterness, it's not a game, it's a release. You've stopped outsourcing your safety to his presence. You've stopped asking him to confirm something you've already decided for yourself. You've stepped out of the dance, and now, he's left with a choice, to rise or to disappear. Not because you demanded it, but because the spell of your chasing has broken. He has to meet you on different ground now. No more illusions, no more projections, just a woman in her clarity, no longer reaching, no longer rehearsing her softness in exchange for scraps of affection. She's not waiting to be chosen. She already chose herself. Von Franz would call this a psychological reordering. When a woman reclaims her animus, when she stops seeing a man as a source and starts seeing him as a mirror, the dynamic can no longer stay the same. If he has depth, he will feel the invitation to step into presence, to engage with her as an equal, to meet her where she already is. But if he cannot, he will fade. Not because she punished him, but because the energetic tether that held him in place no longer exists. And she won't chase, because there is nothing to chase when you are no longer trying to prove your worth. She has seen through the illusion. She knows now, real love doesn't require her to perform, to twist, to vanish into someone else's expectations. Real love meets her in her wholeness, not because she demanded it, but because she became it. And from that place, everything shifts. She wakes up one morning and doesn't feel the ache, not because he finally called or came closer, but because she no longer needs him to. Something has shifted, not on the outside, but deep within. The waiting is gone, the reaching, the trying, the bending, all gone, and in the quiet space left behind, there's something new, not emptiness, not loneliness, a presence, her own. Louise von Franz called this the beginning of the inner marriage. It is not romantic. It is not glamorous. It is sacred. It happens when a woman who has spent her life searching for love in others finally turns inward and meets the masculine energy within herself, the animus, not as a projected fantasy, but as a partner in her own becoming. The animus is not a man. He is a psychic structure, an invisible architecture of thought, decision, and direction. When he is absent, the woman drifts, gives too much, waits too long, but when he awakens, when she begins to integrate him, she gains something rare and powerful: self-possession. She is no longer just the feeling, the flow, the emotion. She becomes the container. She becomes the ground. This does not make her hard. It makes her whole. She no longer sacrifices herself to be loved. She no longer shrinks to be kept. She no longer softens her no into a maybe just to stay close. She lives from her center, not from someone else's approval. She speaks not to be understood, but because her truth deserves air. And her presence changes the room not through force, but through alignment. Von Franz believed that this inner union was the deepest work a woman could do, because without it, every relationship becomes a reenactment of need. Without it, love becomes dependency, dressed as devotion. But with it, love becomes something else entirely: not rescue, not performance, but reflection. Two whole beings meeting in truth, not to complete each other, but to walk beside one another, free. And it begins here, in the quiet. When she stops chasing and starts listening, when she builds her life not around being chosen, but around being real. She makes decisions without asking permission. She rests without guilt. She honors her fire, her instincts, her silence, and in doing so, she becomes magnetic, not because she's trying to be, but because nothing is more compelling than a woman who belongs to herself. The inner marriage does not mean she will never long again. It means she knows the difference between longing and losing herself. It does not mean she will never love again. It means she will never leave herself behind to do it, because now she walks with the one who holds her steady from within, and with every step, she becomes more of who she was always meant to be. It's tempting to believe that every deep feeling means something lasting, that if it moved you, shook you, cracked something open, it must be destined. But Louise von Franz saw things differently. She understood that not every connection is meant to continue. Some people don't come into your life to stay. They come to show you the exact place where you forgot yourself. There's a moment when you've done the work. You've withdrawn the projection. You're no longer clinging or performing. You've found your voice, your center, your truth. And still, he doesn't meet you. He lingers in avoidance. He circles but never lands. Or worse, he disappears completely. And the pain is sharp not because you lost him, but because you thought the work would change him, too. But here is what von Franz knew. Individuation is personal. Sacred, yes, but personal. You can evolve. You can integrate your shadow, restore your boundaries, soften your heart, without losing yourself. And still, he may not rise, because he's on his own path, or he's avoiding it, or he's simply not wired for the kind of depth you're now able to hold. This isn't failure, it's clarity. Some men are not meant to be partners. They are initiators. Their absence teaches you to stop abandoning yourself. Their inconsistency teaches you to become consistent with your own truth. Their resistance to depth sharpens your hunger for the real. These are not punishments. They're mirrors. Temporary guides through the underworld of your longing. And when you see it that way, you stop waiting for him to rise. You stop wasting your fire on someone who cannot hold it. You grieve, yes, but you don't collapse. Because your healing wasn't a strategy to make him stay. It was your return to yourself. And now, you are no longer available for love that requires your disappearance. Von Franz believed in psychological compatibility not as sameness, but as resonance. The sacred relationships are the ones where both people are willing to meet themselves, again and again, through the other. Where projection is withdrawn, and presence takes its place. Where love becomes a vessel for transformation, not control. But if he cannot walk that path, you do not chase him. You bless him, and release him. You let him go not with anger, but with reverence, because he brought you back to your work. Because his absence revealed your strength. Because you are no longer asking life to bend around your loneliness. Some men are chapters, not conclusions. Some loves are thresholds, not destinations. And now, you know the difference. You stay open, but you stay home in yourself. Not every man is meant to rise, but you did. And that's what matters most. She no longer waits for the story to find her. The woman who once chased love like oxygen now writes in a different ink. She doesn't need a beginning wrapped in fireworks or an ending crowned with approval. What she needs, what she's learned to want, is truth, presence. A kind of love that doesn't ask her to vanish to be worthy of it. This is no longer the old script, no longer the tale where the heroine bends herself for connection, where she edits her voice to stay kept, where the entire plot orbits around being chosen. That story belonged to the woman who hadn't yet met herself. the woman whose nervous system mistook attention for affection, the woman who was always performing, hoping, softening the edges of her brilliance, just to be allowed inside someone else's life. That woman is gone. Louise von Franz would call this the return to the mythic self. The moment the outer fairy tale collapses and something deeper emerges, not fantasy, but destiny, not a love story written for her, but one born from her, because now, love is no longer a rescue mission. It's a mirror. It reflects not what she lacks, but what she's claimed. She walks differently now, not because she's harder, but because she's rooted. Her yes means something, so does her no. She doesn't give it all away to be seen. She doesn't stretch herself thin to feel enough. Her love is no longer a transaction. It is an offering, and she offers it only where there is capacity to hold it. This is what happens when the projection lifts, when the animus is integrated, when the self no longer negotiates her worth. The woman becomes mythic not because she's above feeling, but because she's no longer ruled by it. Her emotions pass through, but they do not define her. She doesn't seek clarity in his reaction. She finds it in her body. She trusts what her silence reveals. And if love comes again, and it will feel different. Not because it's perfect, but because she won't lose herself inside it. She won't mold herself into someone more digestible. She won't chase a man hoping he finally sees her value. She sees it now, and that changes everything. Von Franz knew that this was the true feminine journey, not toward another, but back to the self. A return to the place before the world told her she had to shrink, to please, to prove, and in that place, love is no longer about completion. It is about expansion. Two whole beings, walking side by side, reflecting each other's becoming. No more rescue. No more waiting. Just a woman who stopped carrying the old way and, in doing so, finally found her way home. She wakes up one morning and doesn't feel the ache, not because he finally called or came closer, but because she no longer needs him to. Something has shifted, not on the outside, but deep within. The waiting is gone. The reaching, the trying, the bending all gone, and in the quiet space left behind, there's something new, not emptiness, not loneliness, a presence, her own. Marie-Louise von Franz called this the beginning of the inner marriage. It is not romantic. It is not glamorous. It is sacred. It happens when a woman who has spent her life searching for love in others finally turns inward and meets the masculine energy within herself, the animus not as a projected fantasy, but as a partner in her own becoming. The animus is not a man. He is a psychic structure, an invisible architecture of thought, decision, and direction. When he is absent, the woman drifts, gives too much, waits too long, but when he awakens, when she begins to integrate him, she gains something rare and powerful. Self-possession. She is no longer just the feeling, the flow, the emotion. She becomes the container. She becomes the ground. This does not make her hard. It makes her whole. She no longer sacrifices herself to be loved. She no longer shrinks to be kept. She no longer softens her no into a maybe just to stay close. She lives from her center, not from someone else's approval. She speaks not to be understood, but because her truth deserves air. And her presence changes the room not through force, but through alignment. Von Franz believed that this inner union was the deepest work a woman could do, because without it, every relationship becomes a reenactment of need. Without it, love becomes dependency, dressed as devotion. But with it, love becomes something else entirely, not rescue, not performance, but reflection. Two whole beings meeting in truth, not to complete each other, but to walk beside one another, free. And it begins here, in the quiet. When she stops chasing and starts listening, when she builds her life not around being chosen, but around being real. She makes decisions without asking permission. She rests without guilt. She honors her fire, her instincts, her silence, and in doing so, she becomes magnetic not because she's trying to be, but because nothing is more compelling than a woman who belongs to herself. The inner marriage does not mean she will never long again. It means she knows the difference between longing and losing herself. It does not mean she will never love again. It means she will never leave herself behind to do it, because now she walks with the one who holds her steady from within, and with every step, she becomes more of who she was always meant to be. The irony is sharp, almost holy. The moment she stops chasing is the moment everything begins to move. Not because she played it right, not because she mastered some secret tactic, but because she stopped trying to be loved and started being herself, fully, quietly, without apology, and that's when the real chase begins, not from her, but around her. Louise von Franz would never have spoken in terms of games or tricks. She saw the psyche too clearly for that. She understood the deeper movement of energy, how the unconscious responds not to performance but to authenticity. The woman who no longer chases does not become passive, she becomes magnetic, because she is no longer reaching. She's radiating. There is no strategy here, no make him miss you script, no rehearsed aloofness. This is not about pretending you don't care. It's about no longer needing someone else's response to validate your own. That shift subtle, internal, irreversibly, what alters everything. Because the woman who used to outsource her worth has taken it back. She's done waiting, not out of bitterness, out of wholeness, and it shows. She speaks less, but every word lands. She listens more, but not to be polite, to discern. Her presence is felt before she enters the room, not because she demands it, but because she no longer leaks energy trying to be enough. She is enough, not in theory, not in affirmation, in embodiment. In reality, this is what von Franz called individuation, the soul returning to itself. The inner masculine and feminine no longer in conflict, but in communion. The animus integrated, the need for external rescue dissolved. The woman no longer waits for someone to choose her. She has already chosen herself, and the world begins to rearrange around that fact. Men feel it, not in the way of manipulation or seduction, but in the way you feel weather change before it happens. She is no longer available for half-love. She no longer entertains almost. She no longer fills in the blanks. And if he comes toward her, he does so because he senses that he is stepping into a field of realness, not fantasy. There is no space left to play small. There is only truth, and if no one comes, she is still whole. She is still walking her path. She is still in love not with a man, but with the woman she became when she stopped chasing. This is the real chase, the pursuit of self, the long return to your own center. And when that return is complete, love will not arrive as a rescue or a reward. It will come as a resonance. And you will know it not by how it makes you feel temporarily, but by how it honors the wholeness you worked so hard to remember.